Welcome to a show Sunday that's a week late, but that's because we were a week late for the Batman, so too bad. Anyway, um, we watched Ms. Marvel, and I picked this because I started watching it when it came out, as it was releasing for a bit, and I was like, my Antara I think would really like this. And so we watched everything that's currently up to date, which is annoying because we have one more episode that's not out yet. So we're gonna have to wait on that one. But we watched all the others. So we've done episodes 1 to 5. I had previously seen on my own 1 to 3, so I'd seen 4 and 5 yet. But I figure I should let you guys say your piece first. What you think?
Maya, you should go first.
I love the dad.
Is that a surprise?
That's not a surprise.
So, we all know that you simp dads.
I simp dads, yeah. It fills the dad-shaped void.
God.
Yeah, well, I expected to really like this, and I really like it. I remember in the first, I think, 3 episodes before things got really bad, I thought the art direction was really interesting because, like, the way that they put, like, text messages and other, like, doodads, it's very, very, like, creative.
Yeah. I also thought that was really cool.
Yeah, especially since Kamala's, like, an artsy type, so it really fits in with that. And just that experience of being, like, that artsy Asian kid is very, very relatable because we were both that weird Asian artsy kid who, like, was awkward and didn't really, like, fit in. And I just appreciated the fact that we have Asian Americans telling Asian American stories. Because that's where you feel like things make sense. It's not filtered through this white lens where it's like, let's make this random South Asian girl know kung fu because that's Asian. Or like, because like seeing the parents reminded me so much of my own parents and how like that's a very nuanced experience because it's like you have your immigrant parents coming to America, obviously, yada yada. But the reason that they might like either shelter you or not necessarily like know how to parent you, it's something that I feel like if you live through it, then you understand. And I feel like now that I'm an adult, having moved out of my parents' house, I completely get it from both sides. Because like I grew up in the overprotective household too, and I it's the whole like I haven't done like the bad things. Like Kamala told her parents, like I haven't like gone to parties and done cocaine, so why can't I like enjoy my weird weeby shit? And
that
like,
said, the convention was totally inaccurate.
Yeah, it was totally inaccurate, but we'll talk about that later. But just the experience of like, oh, like I wanna like go on a trip on a plane. Like I was only able to do that in my 20s because my parents were like, I don't know, it's a scary world out there, and like I get it, they were war refugees, you know. But yeah, I just like the fact that there are more Asian stories coming out. Like I really want to watch Turning Red because like I've heard a lot of other Asian Americans talk about how the whole like being of a third culture, not quite American enough, but not quite like attached to your Asian roots. It does give you a very distinct identity, and I think
you're a banana.
Yeah, I think that's something that's really hard to capture through a lens of like someone who was natively in Asia or someone who is just white. Like you need that very specific experience to know how to tell that story, and I could see it very well. I don't want to talk too much about spoilers, but there was like one like that ending scene in episode 4, like the absolute terror. I could like see how if I was also put into a similar situation, like if I was like transported into a situation that is culturally similar to what she did, I would also be terrified because I have no fucking idea what it was like to live through like Vietnam during the war, for example. So I don't know. I just felt like it was a very genuine portrayal of the Asian American experience. I really like it.
Okay.
I guess that transitions to me.
Yep.
Actual brown person.
Hi. All right. So I knew that Miss Marvel, I knew like very general information, which I was also interested in seeing, of which she is a Pakistani American.
Yeah.
In Jersey City. Woohoo! Haha. I am not Pakistani, but or Muslim, but I could relate still to a lot of the things, of which there were points. It's kind of funny because in I think it wasn't first episode, second episode.
I think the second and third episode.
The second and third episode, they dropped like a bunch of Bollywood stuff, and there was a point where Maya looked at me and was like, "What are they talking about?" And I was like, "I'm actually just as lost as you are on this one." I've been called an ABCD, which was actually mentioned in the show, which. If you're not aware what that means, it basically is American-born Desi meaning Indian. It is true. I do not deny this. I know very little. Most of the references I got were of like, I would be like, I recognize the song. I don't know where it's from.
I think most of the things you recognize were like the food.
Well, the food too. Like, I was like, oh, it's parota. I know what those are. They're pretty tasty, actually. And apparently very annoying to actually make by hand. We used to always get them frozen. But, yeah, I related a lot to Miss Marvel's in terms of, like, home experience and everything. There was, or I guess that goes into spoilers. Maybe I won't mention that.
Maybe not yet.
But as Maya pointed out, as the artsy person who's into stuff that maybe parents don't quite realize, I didn't really have a sheltered. I think out of the two of us, you had the more sheltered. I don't know. I can't test for how balanced childhood was. But I didn't really have as much of a sheltered thing, but then that goes into other things and stuff like that. But I could relate, like with the grandma especially, I was like, yeah, this is kind of how it the grandma and the aunties and everything like that. And then there was the wedding, and I was like, yeah.
Brown weddings are very fun.
Yes, they're very colorful too.
I hope to attend one day.
They are very fun, except sometimes you don't understand what the priest is saying because they're
from a completely different part of the place.
Sometimes it happens. India is made of hundreds of different languages, by the way. Hey, and Hindi is not the main language. So, yeah, Valen, you can take it. I feel like a lot of the things that I have to talk about are actually in the spoiler section.
Yeah, again, obviously, the cultural aspect is not what I experienced. Well, I would say I was, like, kind of sheltered, but it was more from, like, it was two aspects of it. One was the idea of, like, I'm visually impaired, so I have to be careful about, like, going out, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And the other was just, like, where I was living was definitely, like, I've been watching a lot of videos recently about, like, city planning and how like the American suburbs are like terrible places in terms of like getting around without a car. And like even in my situation was honestly like reasonably good, probably for most people. But I still had to like basically at minimum like to get anywhere was at bare minimum a 30-minute walk. Like you know, bare minimum, and usually places were further away than that. So you know, and again, it was so I didn't really like go out for stuff either. So partly for both those, but also just because it kind of wasn't really super feasible to do that. So there was that, but it was, you know, I feel like I did have some sort of outlets like for like stuff, like places I went to in the summer and stuff like that, and you know, so. Again, there's a little bit of that I can see, but definitely, to me, what's interesting is again seeing the representation of the other cultures, and like what I think is interesting is because it's very clear that this is someone whoever the people who made this, you know, grew up in this culture. It's very obvious, even for someone like me who hasn't, you know, because you can tell when they're like faking it, right? Even I can tell when they're faking it for this kind of stuff. And because the thing is, it's showing the culture in a, I'd say mostly positive manner, but it's not like everything is great and wonderful, right? They do point out some stuff that's not great. Again, like for example, like kind of the sexism that's like in the mosque, right? Like that's an example, right? So, and again, that makes sense that you have the good stuff, the bad stuff, and there's also, it's not like every single person in that culture is the same. Right, that's another thing which is often common. It's like, you know, oh look, all of those other people, they all act the same. It's like, well, obviously not, right? So that's another thing that's also fairly common for people who are like faking this kind of stuff. So yeah, that stuff is really good. And honestly, I think the best thing this show does is simply just like having characters talk to each other.
Yeah, there's
really
lots
like that.
of there's communication, but but there's also lack of communication too.
Sure.
But the lack of communication makes sense.
Right.
It's not like, oh, let's purposely drag out this plot line. It's like, no, it makes sense. Like, if someone was in this situation, I probably would be doing the same exact thing.
It also especially makes sense because the protagonist is young. She's like 16, so she's still not like fully mentally developed. She's still figuring things out. She's still like trying to get a feel for who she is.
Yeah. And so well, hold on one second. And so, for example, like the whole thing about like, you know, oh, I can't tell anybody about my identity or whatever. Like, honestly, that's one of those like tropes that I kind of don't like a lot of the time, especially in superhero stuff, especially when there's like kind of no good reason for it. But in this case, it makes sense considering her relationship with her parents and what they want her to do or whatever. It's like, yeah, she totally would not want to tell them. That makes total sense completely. So, you know, even if maybe that's whether or not that's actually unfounded or not, it makes sense why she would think it's that she should. So, yeah. Anyway, Tara, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say that I completely related to the jeans T-shirt and and then they were like, "Yeah, you're an ABCD," and it's like, yeah.
It is what it is.
Yeah.
Like, and when she was like, "I don't quite fit in Pakistan," like when he was like, "Oh, you don't, first time going into Pakistan," and then it was like, oh, I don't know if that's actually a spoiler, but
it's fine.
Yeah. They go to Pakistan at some point.
Yeah.
For some reason. Ooh.
Of which she's kind of treated like a tourist and stuff like that. Yeah, when you go back to it, because it's, as Mayan said, it's like you're in a third country. It's like, oh, you don't know about these things, and it's like, well, yeah, I grew up
in America.
But then it's also like, oh, so you know Hindi, or oh, so you must like so like all these things, and it's like, no, that's not. It's like you have like bits and pieces of both cultures.
Yeah, but you don't have the full of either
of them,
and you never will.
No, you'll never really have that. So it's like, by the way, no, I do not know Hindi. Just putting that out there. But basically I was getting my hair cut, and this lady who just came back from India, who was white,
Of course.
was like, "Oh, so you know Hindi, right?" And it's like, "No, actually." And she's like, "Oh, you must be such a bad Indian then." And it's like, "No."
What?
Yeah.
Why would some
Apparently.
random person say that? Why would you say that to some person you've never met?
Like,
before?
especially a white person.
Yeah, like we
Like,
say that
do you
shit.
know,
Like,
I'm just, like, does she know her native language? Does she know, like, Nordic? Does she know Gaelic? Does she know Old English? Like,
no, it's
show
not
me
even that.
Show me your real language skills.
Even
bitch.
ignoring that, like that's just like a dick thing to say. Like, what the
Yeah.
like we say that to each other, but like that like we know it's a joke because we know
Yeah.
each other. But like you just don't go to some random person. It's like that'd be like I'm trying to think of an equivalent example, like I don't even. The only example I can think of, like, I don't want to say it because it sounds really racist. So it's like that just shows the point of
Just
like.
laughter with it. You should just laugh.
Well, the thing that I said was that I was like, you know that there's hundreds of different languages in India, right? And she just paused as if she was like, is she telling the truth or is this? And then
I remember you told me that you're better off just speaking in English, and then someone will probably like at least understand more than half of what you're trying to say.
yeah,
Mhm.
which is kind of a result of like the whole colonialism.
Yay, imperialism!
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, so going into that, I was kind of surprised, actually, and this I shouldn't be surprised by this, but I was kind of surprised how, like, not hand wavy they were about how like, yeah, no, the British fucked it up. Like,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
because a lot of times for this kind of stuff, they're like, yeah, it was bad, but like, and they kind of don't really just say it.
That's how
Yeah.
you know it was made by people of color, because
Yeah.
they're not going to sugarcoat
Yeah,
it.
and like they don't go into like all of the details, but like because like they don't really need to, and it's like that's not the point of this. That's not the story being told, right? So, but like they're again like the beginning of an episode, they literally are just like, India's gaining independence after the British fucked everything up, and it's like, okay, sure. I mean, you're not
Yeah,
wrong.
they were just like,
I mean, the dad even said he was like, it was all one country, and then one
Yeah.
stupid British guy drew a line
Yeah.
and then screwed everything up.
Yeah, I don't know, just the fact like
Yeah.
how blunt it was about it, I was surprised. And again, I shouldn't be surprised, but it was, in that sense. And Yeah.
I guess we're going to spoilers at this point.
okay,
spoilers! Go watch it now.
yeah,
Yes,
it's
please go watch it.
I mean, if for some reason you're watching this, and especially if you're of some sort of, Asian, particularly South Asian descent, then absolutely watch it. But if you're not, you should still watch it because you probably don't have a lot of exposure to this culture. I don't.
Yeah.
Particularly because here's the other thing. Like, if you're exposed... Because what's interesting I've noticed about this is it's sort of a mix between cultures, right? Because when we think of Indian culture, you usually think of, like, Hindu Indian, right?
Yeah.
Culture. And when you think of, like, Muslim culture, you think of, like, Middle Eastern culture, right?
Yeah.
So this is sort of the mix in between, which isn't really explored that much. So,
No.
especially shown in, like, Western media. Especially in Western media that's not just portraying it as, like, look at those weird foreigners, right? So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
so I think it's actually very helpful in that sense, just to kind of get a sense of it. And again, also, even ignoring that, again, characters are done well, interaction's good, dialogue's good. There's some fun action scenes. The episode 4 kind of chase fight scene is fun.
Yeah.
So yeah, you should go watch this if you haven't yet.
Oh, I got to tell them about what an auto and a lorry.
Oh yeah.
Mine was like, oh, look. Or rather, mine was like, look, it's a truck. And I was like, no, that's a lorry.
And then I was like, never mind. He got hit by a lorry. Mild spoiler.
Anyway, spoilers.
Yes, spoilers.
Spoilers.
So, the other main thing I wanted to touch upon is between episode 4 and episode 5, she basically gets sent back in time to the time when India got its independence. And, well, the whole place got its independence, and then one British guy ruined it by
Yeah.
drawing a stupid line and everything.
It almost feels like it was like revenge from the British, but I don't know. It just feels very vindictive to me.
Basically, I was like, okay, guys, let me... Because this part I actually do know about, not because I've heard stories or anything like that, because... So the part of India that my family is from is the complete opposite side of it, of which I did not hear any stories concerning the partition and stuff like that. So this is not something that that necessarily affected my family or me or anything like that. But I did learn about it during like in college and stuff like that, and through documentaries and through like our friends' stories and stuff like that. Of which I kind of explained to these guys like, okay, so this is the basic history of what you need to know since we're going to be thrown into this, and I do not know how much they will explain of this. So I will explain this.
Yeah,
as
I mean,
best as I can.
I definitely knew about it also from like, you know, school stuff as well. Again, I'm sure it's, and then it's also, again, there's a similar-ish, emphasis on the ish, story to also what happened in the Middle East and also in all of Africa.
Yeah, which we talked about too.
Right, and again, like, because we also talked about how, you know, people treat this like it's like ancient history, and it's like, this is largely less than 100 years ago. For some, it's like maybe almost like more like 50 years ago, especially for like some African countries. So, that's not a long time. You know, again, there are people who are alive today still who had to deal with this, right? So, you know, it's like, yeah, it makes sense that like people are like, why are these countries still poor? It's like, again,
they're brand new.
Right, again, my example was you know, think about how long were the countries of Europe just fighting each other over stupid bullshit for like, you know, the random kingdoms and, you know, all that kind of stuff for like hundreds of years before things finally kind of settled down after sort of World War One kind of settled things down, and then World War II basically was just like, all right, no, stop it. So, but that took a long time and a lot of people dying for dumb shit. So, you know, and a lot of like really, you know, corrupt people taking over and, you know, stuff like that. So yeah, it's like expecting these countries to be like, why aren't you just like us? It's like, doesn't work like that.
No, doesn't. And then the whole thing is that when a lot of these places got like imperialized and stuff like that, the people that came into the countries and stuff like that, they wanted to subjugate the people. Basically, they wanted to make sure that they didn't revolt or do any of it, and like followed them and stuff like that. So they cracked down on their cultures, languages. I mean, you were explaining just the other day about how your alphabet basically got taken away from you
by the French.
And it was like, and people of power and stuff like that. So and the thing is that this is over like centuries. In some cases and stuff like that. So when they were like, yeah, here you go, here's your independence, bye, it's kind of like,
what do you expect us to do?
Yeah, it's like, we don't have people to lead us right now. Lead us in terms of like, we don't have like, they basically got rid of anyone who had any idea, like in the past and stuff, that previously had ruled and previously maybe had known what they were doing. They took away the cultures. They had basically decimated whatever natural resources and stuff like that, and left, because a lot of the times you would have like people, like I've heard lots of stories about people about how the British took like gold and jewels, or like how they forced people to go mining, or they would take gold and whatever.
Yeah, the Viet Cong did that to the South Vietnam. That's why my family left in various different ways too.
So it's kind of like, how do you expect? And it's like, yeah, so you get to deal with this mess, and we're gonna go. We're just gonna dust our hands of this.
Yeah, we're not bad anymore because we stopped imperializing.
Yeah.
I just hate that mentality that certain people have. I'm not going to say which types of people have it, but they have this, like, almost entitlement to be, like, you have the nerve to ask, like, why we, like, our countries of origin are like this when, you know, you have no idea. Like, your history has already been played out. And then you erased a very big chunk of ours. Like, like I said, Vietnam has no, like, it doesn't have its original alphabet anymore because the French came and they imposed the Roman alphabet onto us, and we no longer like know how to read Chinese characters like we used to. We don't have our original alphabet anymore. Like I have a family friend who now lives abroad, and she sought out what her name meant in the old Chinese characters. Now she understands why it has that meaning, because that meaning was lost, and we only know it through oral tradition now because certain words mean certain things, but you can't see it. You have to like squint and you see all of these weird Roman letters, but it's not as meaningful as what the characters used to be. That is an entire huge chunk of Vietnamese culture that is just eradicated.
Yeah, it's just, yeah, this has turned into a history thing. But yeah, for a third world country, like just to call like third world countries, oh, they're not working hard enough, or why haven't they fixed things yet?
I just feel like
why is it so corrupted? It's kind of like
people need to do the work to understand why things are like how they are, and I think the fact that there are more stories being told from this perspective, it should entice people to look and see like what wrongs these first world countries have done, what violence they have done to these other countries.
Yeah, and it's like,
not us who did this to ourselves.
Well, yes, and also again, coming at this from the white person perspective, there is, very often the idea of like, I think, because, there's the whole thing about, like, like, oh my god, when white people hate the word white privilege or whatever. And it's, again, kind of a little bit different conversation, but same rough idea. And the idea is, like, we're not saying that, like, you, Joe Smith, were the one that, like, killed the Indians or whatever. That's not the point. And the point is not to say you are a terrible person. The point is to say, this is what happened. And you individually are not responsible for this, but now it is your job to make sure you are not responsible for one in the future.
You should at least understand what happened so you don't do the same thing.
But then the other thing too is that I feel like in elementary school and high school and middle school, I don't know why I went out of order, but whatever. Elementary school, middle school, and high school. When you learn about world history and stuff, it's very European focused. You don't really learn much about any of the other countries, and I feel like that also plays a role in it. Because
we talked about this once where we learned more about it from like either talking to family members or through the internet when we were much older.
Or in my case, college, or just documentaries and stuff.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a really bad thing, because then you go into this thinking like, why they must be unimportant because we're not learning about it in school. But in reality, they're just as rich and they have so much history and stuff like that. It's just, and even for the Native Americans, like when you start American history, you don't start it on the Native Americans. You start it with the Pilgrims coming here, as if that is the start of it.
Yeah, or the framework is like, the framework is usually like, oh yeah, there were like Native Americans around, but like they weren't doing very much, so like whatever.
Yeah,
and
it's like they were just hitting things with like sticks or something like that. When in reality, it was way more.
There's like
rich.
Again, like I don't know a lot of this stuff, even for Native American stuff, but like I know there was like of course there was like, again, like, because here's the thing, people talk about like the Aztecs and stuff, like as if again they're like ancient history, and it's like, the Aztecs were there when the conquistadors showed up. Like, they were doing shit. And, like, again, there was others that were around. I know there was a whole Iroquois Confederacy that was, like, around, in early U.S. times or whatever. So, like, there's a bunch of shit that people just don't really know about. And, again, so from my perspective, I can't speak for you guys specifically because, again, I had California high school, education for history. And I would say of the U.S., our California is probably pretty good compared to most of the U.S. And even then, it's not that great. Like, again, so, for example, I knew about, like, British colonial rule of India, but it was very much like, it was all treated as, like, so the British, like, kind of ruled over India for a while, and, like, and then they split it up later. And it was like, it was mentioned, and I know that stuff happened. I knew Gandhi was a thing, obviously, but like I don't know any of the specific history at all, and it wasn't really framed from the idea of like this was hundreds of years. It was framed in the idea of like this happened for a while. Oh well, you know. And again, like, and India was probably the one that actually got more focused. For example, I didn't know. I don't think we ever really went over like the Middle East at all. It was just like, yeah, Ottomans were there, and then stuff happened, whatever, and then like that was like never gone into. The like Southeast Asia was never gone into, besides just like, oh yeah,
except the Vietnam War,
except for that, right? And you know, all this kind of stuff. And here's the thing: obviously, the issue is that you do not have time to go over literally every single culture in all of history. That's just impossible. So you do have to choose what to cover. But there's some things which like you're gonna have to talk about, like World War I and II, and like, you know, stuff like that. So right, that obvious. Okay, sure.
Yeah.
But there really does need to be some sort of emphasis for something else. And like one thing that I thought of for this is because at least for when I did high school, freshman year was world history, junior year was U.S. history, and then senior year was government/econ or whatever. And what I think, and so sophomore year was kind of the year of like, you know, either don't take a history class or you take one of the two AP classes, which is there's human geography, which is like not even really a history class, it's kind of its own thing, which to be fair, I think people should learn that anyway, but that's a different conversation. But the other option was AP European history.
Yeah.
And that was it. And like, I'll be honest, I took human geography because I thought it was more interesting, but like, okay, if you're going to have AP European history, sure. Is there some stuff that probably happened in Europe that was not talked about normally that's interesting and is important? Sure. Sir, there is. Go into it, fine. But there should therefore also be AP African history, AP Latin American history, AP Asian history. Like, actually, you know, that should be the thing, and you should have the option to learn that stuff and go into a lot more detail. And it's not. So that's kind of my issue with that in terms of what I think should happen. Good luck getting that to happen. Especially, and also the idea is that you're locking it behind an AP class. Again, of course, disincentivizes, you know, everyone from learning this stuff. So,
it also just sucks because then it's like, because the way that, like, I had obviously known about the British rule and stuff, but you know how it was handled when I first learned about it in elementary school, like the first time it was brought up, well, not first learned about it, when it was first even brought up and everything. A Shirley Temple movie was played.
Oh my gosh.
And it's like, great. This is how we're going to, like...
This is how we're doing it.
Yeah. And then that was it. That was the only real mention of it and stuff like that. And it's like the whole mentality too of like, oh, the Dark Ages. Nothing happened during the Dark Ages. It's like, no, like the Muslims were doing a lot of things.
There was
in,
so
like,
much going on in the rest of the world.
Yeah.
Just because, like, Europe was down the shitter doesn't mean that everyone else was.
Yeah.
There's 4,000 years of Chinese history that we know nothing about.
Yeah. And again, China is one of the countries that I feel like, of the non-European ones, is actually somewhat focused on.
Yeah.
Not for very long, and again, not as much, it should do more. But it's at least more than, like, again, Vietnam, or, you know, again, I feel like, okay, because again, there's, like, outside of Europe, it's like the other countries that are really gone into at all are basically China and India. And, like...
And Egypt.
Well, yeah, ancient Egypt. But again, when you say Egypt, it's pretty much just, like, ancient Egypt, and then once, like, the Greeks show up, it's sort of like, yeah, Egypt, who cares about Egypt anymore? Right? Like, no, there's nothing about, like, anything about Egypt. For example... I legitimately have no idea what happened to, like, Egypt from, like, the Greeks to the Ottomans. I know nothing. Like, what happened? I don't fucking know. Like, but that's, like, thousands of years or something. It's at least 1,000 years. So, yeah.
It's kind of bad that I know more about, like, what happened in England through all its, like, 2,000 years and stuff like that, but I know little to nothing about my own country.
Yeah, same. And I think that just fosters that like feeling of being that person that doesn't fit anywhere.
Yeah.
Because I'm not important enough to have my history be told in school, but I also am so far removed from my quote unquote country of origin that I don't really like have, like, the main way I learned about what happened to people I know is because they told like my parents, and I overheard what they said, and I was like, oh my god.
Yeah.
But it's just like when do I get a turn to be important? That's why like I grew up idolizing a fictional cartoon lady who fought for China, which is not even my country, because that's all I had. I had Mulan and I had anime, and then white people tried to take anime from me, and I'm just like, well, just because Naruto is blonde hair, blue eye doesn't mean he's an heir of the Aryan race.
That's an interesting out of context quote.
Yeah, I really can't stand this like attempt to claim anime because of how people's hair is colored. No, they're fucking Japanese.
Yeah. Oh, what? You're telling me Naruto isn't fucking Swedish? Oh, damn! I wouldn't have guessed. Like,
I had no idea you knew what a Naruto was in Sweden.
I know. Yeah. And again, even besides that, which you should not ignore what you're saying, but even if you want to think of this about just from like an American perspective, there's a ton of shit that's happened in this country that we don't even talk about for history.
Yeah.
Right? Like the two things that immediately pop into my head are the Tuskegee experiment and the fucking Tulsa massacre. Right? That's never talked about in school. I didn't learn about any of that shit until much later.
I feel like the AIDS crisis also doesn't get talked about either.
It's very, very.
I feel like, I feel like if it is talked about, it's talked about from the sense that, like, yeah, and like AIDS showed up, and like that's kind of it, right? It's not explained about how the government, you know, the Reagan administration at the time was basically like, oh, AIDS is happening. Oh, who's it affecting? Gay people. Oh, fuck them. Who cares, right?
Yeah.
And they were acting, you know, it's a bunch of shit like that, which is not talked about. And again, we had relatively decent history education compared to most places in the country. Especially now, there's a lot of, you know, this whole shit about people being like, oh my god, CRT and all this shit. So they're trying to basically try. There was a thing, I remember a news story that's happened recently, about there was like some education plan that was trying to be put forward in, I believe, Texas, because of course, that was basically, it wasn't, shit, what was it calling them? It was that they were trying to not call them slaves and not use that word, and instead it was like forced workers or something like that. It was some other word that they were trying to use to make it sound nicer than slave, because it's like.
I learned about this in one of my classes that I took last summer. I took like a race theory class, and like there is so much just in law that is not talked about at all. It's so hush hush, and like we had to read some of these cases, and when you read the words of even some of the quote-unquote milder justices at the time, they're still like racist, because there was this one that I remember very distinctly because he was like, the black man is not as horrible as the Chinese. And I was just like, all right, there was a reason that I had to read this. I wasn't there.
Yeah.
Like there's so much, like I wrote an entire 20-page paper about Asian racism in this country because it is not talked about. You hear a little bit about yellow peril, and that's it. We got like what, 2 passages? We got 2 passages in our entire 2 years of AP US history, and I only learned about like the Chinese being used to build the railroads and then the Chinese Exclusion Act. That's it.
Basically. Yeah, and I remember, oh shit, see now I forgot. There was something I read which like basically
we didn't really learn about the Japanese camps either.
No, because
I didn't learn about that.
I have the book from George Takei, his memoir about living through the internment camp. It's a graphic novel. It's very good. Please read it. Yeah, it's his graphic novel. It's so good.
And like, because again, going back, yeah, and like the whole thing with like the Chinese workers, like again, that was very much in California, right? So like I knew that there were Chinese, and now I'm forgetting. There was a thing I saw somewhat recently, I want to say in the last few months, that sort of described how like at first the Chinese workers were actually like the view of them wasn't actually that racist. It was because it was sort of like, or at least it was, you know, they're better than like, you know, the black people, whatever, right? Like obviously not as good as white people because that's what they thought, you know, for everybody. But it was like relatively like okay for a while, but then due to, I want to say it was like fears that, you know, or it was the idea that like, wait, Chinese people are actually like buying land and are like,
yeah, it's the whole immigrants
Yeah.
taking my jobs thing. It's
Yeah.
the immigrants taking my things thing. And
right,
that's
because
why
at
they
first,
keep trying
it,
to
yeah, because
do
at
that.
first it was like, hey, they're working on this stuff that like, you know, sucks and nobody else really wants to work on it. Okay, fine, they're doing their thing, that's cool. But when they actually started to like live and do like
Yeah.
you know other stuff, then people were like, whoa, hold on, and so that kind of spiraled from there. I'm not remembering this that specifically. I need to find where I heard that before. But yeah, so there's shit like that.
Like,
Of
right
course-
now it's happening with the whole Mexican thing. It's like,
Right.
was like, oh yeah, we need to build a wall.
Yeah. And again, there's the whole, going back to the Native American thing. Also, in terms of how Native American history is usually taught, it's like, well, Native American history is not taught at all. But from the perspective
Yeah.
of the U.S., it's like, yeah, so like there were Native Americans, and then like the U.S. came through, and like colonial, and during like, you know, the colonies time, there was fights maybe, and then like, you know, during Manifest Destiny Westward Expansion, and then like there was some stuff there. But like that's kind of it. They don't mention
Yeah.
all of. I mean, the Trail of Tears is of course mentioned, but it's sort of like this happened.
Glossed over.
It was how it was presented was like this happened once.
Yeah.
Which is
When in
wrong.
reality, there were multiple instances, like the whole, like, basically, the whole thing with the diseases, the pandemic
and-
that, like, swept across Native Americans and stuff like that, that's never talked about. Like, how ruthless, like conquistadors, like, because I
Mhm.
feel like that's not talked about either. And I feel like sometimes with how the wording and the textbooks were, they always
Yeah.
frame the Native Americans as just,
Savages.
yeah, when no, they were not.
Because like the thing is that
But I feel like that's also like across for other things too. Like
Yeah.
if it wasn't European and it wasn't American, then
yeah.
it was just like, yeah, they'd be like, oh, of course they got taken over or something like that. And it's just like, no, that's not how that was and stuff like that. There's like more that goes into it.
Yeah, and then like especially for conquered lands, if you are mixed, there was violence. And I don't think people acknowledge that enough. Because yeah, it's not nice to like think about that, but it's
Yeah.
almost inevitable for so many conquered places.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We should get back to
No,
Miss Marvel.
I know,
Right.
but like a last point that I want to make for this is again going back to the whole idea of like, it's not to say that like by learning about this stuff and teaching it in school, especially, it's not to say like, see, look, you white people did all of these bad things. It's all your fault. That's not the point. The point is to say this is what happened when people viewed other people as
Yeah.
lesser and were basically
Yeah.
like trying to use them for their own benefit. And it's a way of
Yeah.
saying this was bad, and to show that people like you are capable of doing this at some point. Doesn't mean you're guaranteed to, doesn't mean that everybody in your group is bad, but it happened. And again, obviously in other cultures, other situations, again, not saying that like only white people enslaved people. That happened for all cultures all over the place, okay? But again, this is the more recent history of what we have at the moment. And so you need to kind of learn about this, and so you need to be able to experience or get the experience from other people, at least to some degree, right?
Yeah.
In order to lessen these kinds of events from happening going forward.
Yeah.
And so that's why, again, stuff like this, because again, people always say like, you know, well, when I say people, it's pretty much always white people and pretty much always white men who are like, you know, all this representation, like, it's not really that necessary or whatever, right? And it's like, you know, is the fact that, like, we have this show, Ms. Marvel, like, is this radically changing my life? Because, oh, there's representation. No, to be honest, and again, I'm sure it's nice for you guys, but it's not like, oh my god, now that you have this representation, your life is so much better now. No, it doesn't work like that, right? But it's still important in the sense that, like, it's reaffirming what people of that culture do experience and showing that, hey, you're not weird, this does happen in this way. And it's also showing for people like me to say, this is what the other people do. And that's fine. It's different from you. That's whatever. It's what it is. There's some good, there's some bad. It's just different. Fine. And that is important to realize that this stuff is normal. It's not, it's reasonable to continue like this. And, you know, obviously there is such that, people always talk about like, oh my god, they're forcing an agenda or whatever. And the thing is, if you just have shitty writing, then yeah, it can feel like that, right? If that's what they're doing. But if it's something like this, which does not have shitty writing, it doesn't come off like that because it's actually just a nice experience. So, yeah, anyway. Long tangent on other stuff. But again, I think that if someone did not know about what we were talking about, then that was important for them to know too. So,
yeah. This is an actual horrible thing that happened. And yeah, it's something Kamala also had to figure out too for his and even witness for herself. Like minus the whole supernatural thing, there was like the actual reality of that time period too.
Yeah.
Because it was like, yeah, Captain America was on the other side of the world and stuff during World War II and stuff, but this was also happening. It evidently
at the same time.
Yeah.
Which, to be honest, I didn't even realize that. Because, again, this stuff is often kind of compartmentalized of, like, this is this event and this is that event, and they're all totally separate from each other. It's
and then when you think about it, it's like, this was happening during World War II.
Yeah.
Or about like, when World War II was going on.
Yeah. And that affects things as well. So anyway, there's obvious we could talk about this a little forever. But I think it was important that we did talk about it. So
I think so too. That said, also appreciate the New Jersey representation.
Yeah. Thanks, Kamala.
Yeah. Well, okay. I mean, you tell me. So I have been to Jersey City as like I stayed there in a quote unquote hotel for a while, but I was very much in the like kind of business district, right by the water, across from NYC. So, which does not look like what's showed in this show, which I presume is other areas. For what does this seem pretty accurate? I don't know.
Actually, I've only been to Jersey City once.
I haven't been to like the other areas of Jersey City. The place where you stayed was kind of near where I used to work, but from what I've heard from like friends in school, North Jersey's kind of rough. So I imagine from seeing a little bit of Newark, this is probably kind of accurate, because I guess the thing with North Jersey, if you go towards Manhattan, it's a bit more like city-ish.
It's more industrial too.
Yeah. And then if you go towards Pennsylvania, it becomes like it's all industrial towns. Like we drove through part of like the southern part of North Jersey, and it was extremely depressing. Like you see factories and you see industrial buildings everywhere, and there are just highways for miles, and that's all you see.
I'm just like, if someone were to like come from New York and come down, they wouldn't assume that New Jersey was the Garden State until they hit like
you have to hit
the
like
middle of the probably Asbury.
Yeah, like the quote unquote mythical Central Jersey. We say that because we were originally from around Central Jersey, but that's where you start to get more of the green, the more of the farm areas, you get the shore, which is great.
There's also like more farmlands, especially as you keep going down, it gets more.
And then you get to Atlantic City, which Donald Trump fucked in the ass.
Yeah. Speaking. And then
it goes full circle.
And then I don't know too much about the towns near Philadelphia and stuff like that, but there is Camden, which I think.
Don't go to Camden.
Yeah. There's Camden. It exists. I haven't really gone to Trenton either, so I do not know how that is. I've only driven through it.
Yeah, the only impression I can get is that it's probably more city-ish, because I mean, like, the people I know who are from around there call it the hood. So, I mean, they're allowed to call it the hood because they live there. But,
yeah, I mean, there's this kind of stuff, there's always a range. Because, again, like, I'm comparing Jersey City to, like, Oakland, okay, from where I am. And so there is, like, a central kind of city, in city urban center of Oakland that's, like, your skyscrapers and, all that kind of stuff, right? But the sort of the stereotype of Oakland is that it's like kind of a ghetto kind of area as well with a lot of poor people. Both of those exist. There's also like the rich white people area too of Oakland, right?
Mhm.
There because
Yeah.
it's a big place and there's like 700,000 people there. I don't remember, something like that.
Mhm.
So and so I imagine it's kind of again the similar idea in that sense there. Also, it's of course across the bay from the main city of the area. So
Mhm.
yeah. But it is interesting to get this sort of sense of that. Because also, like, I don't know, I feel like for over here, I mean, obviously there are, like, South Asians around here, but I don't feel like there's really, like, that many, like, dedicated, like, South Asian, like, areas.
There are a lot in New Jersey.
Yeah, because I feel like, of course we have, like, Chinatowns and, like, stuff like, I mean, those are everywhere, but, like, we have a lot of more, like, East Asian stuff here, which makes sense considering where we are, across the ocean. And of course a lot of Hispanic areas. But there's not as many, like, South Asian, really. There again, the people exist for sure. Probably, again, I could be wrong, I just might not know of the areas. But that is just kind of interesting seeing how it's, like, similar but different at the same time to stuff that I've seen in various areas around, like, Oakland or San Francisco and stuff like that. But yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, when there was a billboard for where they were like, "Welcome to Jersey City, the site of Miss Marvel." And I was like, "Oh, that's so cute."
Yeah, it's cute. We have something to be proud of.
Especially since a lot of people rat on New Jersey.
Yeah, for no reason.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Wait,
Shut up, you guys are weak.
Is there a superhero that's like? Oh, well, we got Shang-Chi, right? He was in.
Yeah,
you
Shang-Chi.
guys got Shang-Chi.
Shang-Chi, and also I think.
Ant-Man?
Yeah, I think at least Ant-Man and the Wasp partly takes place in San Francisco, but I don't know if it's like I don't know if he's like from there. Or they just happen to be there. I don't remember. It's been a while since I've seen that movie, but yeah. So we got that. So, hooray!
Then Tony is from LA. I think it's.
Oh yeah, definitely. So
there are a ton of New Yorkers.
Yeah. Well, because isn't Steve Rogers like?
Steve's from
there?
Brooklyn,
Yeah.
and then no, not Tom. Peter's from Queens.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Then we have Miles.
right.
Then Doctor Strange is.
He's from Manhattan. I think.
Yeah, Manhattan.
Okay. And then Thor.
Well,
He's from
Thor
Asgard.
Thor is elsewhere.
He's from Asgard.
Speaking of, as of actually while we're recording this, this is actually the weekend that Love and Thunder came out, which I assume you haven't seen yet. I have not seen it.
No.
Hopefully get this. I don't know when I'm gonna see it, soon-ish maybe, but probably not this weekend. But we'll see. Yeah, I don't know. I think this is, again, like we said, we had this long conversation already, and kind of to repeat ourselves, but we think this is good. We think it's important that it has the reference, that has the framing that it does.
Yeah.
And also, it does help it kind of, because I know people have often said that, like, oh, there's so much Marvel stuff, or whatever, it can get kind of fatiguing or whatever. And honestly, I can see that, especially because when people are talking about, like, between the shows and the movies, it's like every month there's like something kind of.
Yeah.
And so I can get that, but I think something like this helps where this is its own kind of thing. It can feel separate. So as long as they're being unique enough with sort of the presentation and exactly what's happening or whatever, I personally don't mind it. But again, I could see definitely like your average audience maybe getting a bit burnt out, because I did see, like, for example, speaking of the Thor Love and Thunder, I've seen that is something that I have seen people say is that, like, this isn't new enough, sort of, in kind of the idea. So I don't know. It's at the same time, people are saying like, oh my god, a Marvel movie is not like amazing. It's like, okay, but like a lot of them are not amazing. I don't know. Whatever. Anyway, different conversation. But yeah, I don't know. Is there anything else anyone wants to say about this, since we've talked for long enough, almost an hour?
I don't think there's anything more to say. Just go watch it.
Okay.
Yeah, go watch it.
Okay. Well, we have to random a pick for next time. Speaking of next time, so we last watched The Batman, so Tara, what is your replacement?
Alright, so my replacement for this that I totally did not realize that I totally decided for the last few weeks or so. So, my pick is actually a movie that I haven't seen in forever.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, it's a Western animation,
Oh, okay.
Oh.
so it's different. But it's not Disney.
Oh, okay.
It's a movie that I remember I liked as a kid, but I didn't completely understand it. So I'm hoping that maybe watching it now as an adult, I would understand. It could also be that because when I watched it, it was also on TV, so it could be a thing where, like, because when thunderstorms happen, you lose your cable.
Right.
So it could also be a thing where I missed parts of it because of whatever happening. But I wanted to watch Secret of Nim.
Ah, okay. This is one of those that, again, I've heard about for a long time. I have never seen it. But pretty much every time I've heard it, people talk about it, it's from the perspective of, this is very good.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, same.
Yeah, okay.
I haven't seen it.
I wouldn't be able to tell you a lot about what happens in it because I don't remember too much. But again, I used to watch this whenever, like, Toon Disney they used to have movie Fridays, and this would come up and stuff like that. And I remember bits and pieces of it. And I remember the animation was really good and stuff, but I didn't quite understand it completely. Probably because I was only getting bits and pieces and I didn't actually watch the entire thing through. So, yeah, I'm interested to see how it is now watching it.
Okay.
I can finally watch this movie.
Yeah.
I know there's a terrible direct-to-DVD sequel.
Yes. I watched that too. I can attest that is a terrible...
I guess it was direct-to-VHS. Whatever, doesn't matter. We're not watching that.
No.
Okay, well, but speaking of, we have to spin and see what we are actually going to be watching next week. And it is going to be... Oh! Speaking of Western animation, Lilo and Stitch.
I just actually watched this recently, and I was like, wow. Now I understand the struggle so much better. And we were just talking about how, like, in history, you don't learn about a lot of indigenous people.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of like the whole Hawaii.
The Hawaiians got fucked.
Yeah.
Hawaiians. The whole monarchy got overthrown by a bunch of white sugarcane plantation owners.
Yep. See, here's the thing. I don't think I've actually seen this movie.
Is this another one of those I don't remember if I did or not?
Well, here's the thing. If I did, it was a long time ago, and I just, like, I'm not going to remember, like, anything. Like, obviously, I know these characters are a thing, and I know sort of their basic personality. And, of course, I've seen people talk about this movie a lot. But...
You probably know the trailers for this movie, too.
Yeah, I know I have seen, like, again, I would watch, like, TV channels or as a kid, and I know I saw, like, advertisements for this movie. And those. I know I've seen advertisements, but I don't think I've actually seen the movie. It's in one of the Kingdom Hearts games a little bit. But that doesn't say much. Also, it's in Dream Drop Distance, which is anyway, whatever. Or wait, no, doesn't matter. Anyway, but yeah, so we're watching Lilo and Stitch next weekend.
Yay!
Okay.
See if that conversation will be an hour long.
Oh boy. We'll see.
We'll see. Well, maybe we'll be able to talk about, like, the finale of this.
Yeah, that's true.
So we'll see how much time we have. But yeah, okay. So next week is Lilo and Stitch.
Yeah. Yes. Bye-bye.
Bye.